All right, welcome everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into a creature, well, one you probably think you know, the Roadrunner. Our listeners send in some really fascinating articles about Roadrunners, and I got to be honest, at first glance I thought, okay, a bird. How much could there really be to say?
Mm,
But let me tell you, I was totally wrong.
yeah, that's how it goes with nature sometimes, right? It's easy to overlook the amazing stuff happening right under our noses. I mean, we see something so often, we just kind of take it for granted. But the Roadrunner, oh man, they are way more than meets the eye.
For sure. We all have that cartoon image in our heads, right?
Yeah.
But the real deal, the real Roadrunner, man, they are masters of surviving out in the desert. This isn't just some random bird. This is like a perfectly designed machine built to handle one of the toughest environments on the planet.
You got it. And one of the first things that'll blow your mind is their speed. We're talking 20 miles per hour. That's faster than most people can even sprint.
Whoa, hold on, 20 miles an hour. Now that's impressive. I'm trying to picture that, like a blur of feathers just zipping across the desert floor. I mean, that's crazy fast for a bird that doesn't really even fly. So, like, what's the point of all that speed if they're not really taking to the skies?
Well, think about it. Out in the desert, there's not a whole lot of places to hide, right? So being able to book it is super important, both for getting away from predators and chasing down their own meals. And those powerful legs, man, those are the key. They let roadrunners cover ground so efficiently in this like super rough landscape. Every step could mean life or death out there.
Makes you wonder why even bother having wings if you can run that fast on the ground?
That's a good question. Seems like they found their own little niche where running is just a better way to get around energy-wise. They can fly, but it's more for short bursts, like hopping over stuff or getting to a higher spot. They're all about those legs.
Right. Okay, so speed's important, but then there's that killer heat. How does anything survive in the desert sun? Especially with water being so scarce.
That's where their adaptations get really cool. I mean, their feathers aren't just pretty to look at, they serve a real purpose out there. The colors and patterns they have are like the perfect camo for the desert. They blend right in, making it super hard for predators to spot them.
So they're basically invisible.
Pretty much. And those long legs we were talking about, well, they're not just for speed, they're also amazing for navigating all that rough terrain, all the rocks and uneven ground. Those legs keep them steady and sure-footed while they're darting around.
Wow, it's like they have a built-in desert survival guide. Seriously. Are there any special things they do to deal with that crazy heat?
Oh yeah, totally. For example, roadrunners are known to sunbathe in the mornings. It's weird, but they expose their backs to the rising sun to soak up that heat and warm up fast. It's actually a really smart way to save energy instead of using it all up trying to regulate their own body temperature. And when the sun's at its peak, they pant, kind of like dogs do, to get rid of all that extra heat.
Now that's fascinating. There's so much strategy that goes into how they've evolved to not just survive, but actually thrive in this crazy environment. But what about food? Finding a decent meal out in the desert, that can't be easy, right? What do they even eat out there?
You might be surprised by the variety in their diet. They're what we call opportunistic carnivores, which basically means they're not picky eaters.
Hmm.
Insects, lizards, snakes. Heck, they'll even take down a venomous rattlesnake.
Rattlesnakes. Whoa, hold up. That sounds crazy risky. How do they pull that off?
All right, so this is where evolution gets super interesting. Over time, over many, many years, roadrunners have actually built up a certain immunity to some types of snake venom. It's wild, right? This means they can eat creatures that other animals wouldn't even go near, giving them a huge advantage when it comes to finding food in the desert.
It's like this epic, ongoing battle between the roadrunner and the rattlesnake, each one trying to outdo the other. The roadrunner's immunity evolving alongside the rattlesnake's venom.
Exactly. And the way they actually hunt those rattlesnakes is just as cool. They often work in pairs. Can you believe that? One bird will distract the snake while the other one comes in from behind and just wham! They deliver these super precise, powerful strikes to the head with their beaks until the snake's down for the count.
No way they coordinate like that. That's insane. You wouldn't think a bird could outsmart a rattlesnake, but I guess you'd be wrong. It really shows you just how intelligent they are, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just hunting either. Roadrunners have been seen using tools like actual twigs and stuff to mess with their prey. Like, they'll use a stick to get a scorpion to come within striking distance. It's
And
wild.
tools. Seriously. I mean, you usually hear about primates doing that, not birds. It makes you wonder how much we underestimate what's going on in the minds of other species, especially the ones we think we know.
No kidding. The roadrunner isn't just reacting to its environment, it's actually, like, problem solving and using what's around it to its advantage.
It's amazing how much we're learning about this creature, just from taking this deep dive, and we're just getting started. But, speaking of surprises, what about their social lives? Are roadrunners the romantic type?
Believe it or not, they're pretty romantic. They form these monogamous pairs during mating season, and their little courtship rituals are quite the show, let me tell you. They do these elaborate dances and even give each other gifts.
Hold up, gift giving. What kind of gifts are we talking about here?
Well, it's less about roses and chocolates and more about being practical. The male usually brings the female some food, like a lizard or a big juicy insect. It's his way of showing her he can take care of her and their future chicks.
Ah, so it's all about proving his survival skills, showing he can provide.
Exactly. These displays aren't just about attracting a mate, it's about ensuring the survival of their genes, making sure their line continues. It's amazing to see how much complexity there is in their social behavior, especially in such a harsh place.
It's like a reminder that surviving out there isn't just about physical strength. It's about brains, strategy, and, yeah, maybe even a little bit of romance.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And this actually brings us to another really cool thing about the Roadrunner, how important they are in human culture. In Native American folklore, they're often seen as symbols of speed, intelligence, and survival.
Oh, that's right. I was reading about that. It's like they embody the whole spirit of the desert itself. And it's not just in ancient cultures. They've made their way into modern pop culture too, right?
Definitely. Thanks in no small part to their, cartoon appearances, Roadrunners have become like these iconic figures. But it's interesting how that cartoon version, while funny, kind of misses out on a lot of the real bird's nuance.
Yeah, I see what you mean. The cartoon focuses on the slapstick, the silly stuff. But the real deal, they have this intelligence and fierceness that you don't really see in the cartoons.
Exactly. It's a reminder that there's always more to the story than what we see on the surface. And when we take the time to dig deeper, to really understand, well, that's when we can truly appreciate the complexity of the natural world.
For sure. And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of the Roadrunner's world, honestly.
Oh, totally. There's so much more to discover about these awesome creatures.
We've been talking about how amazingly adapted Roadrunners are to the desert, but it makes you wonder, with all this climate change happening, messing with ecosystems all over the place, how are these shifts going to affect a creature that's so perfectly tuned to one specific type of habitat?
It's a really big question, one that scientists are trying to figure out right now. It's not so simple, you see. On one hand, roadrunners are incredibly tough. I mean, they've evolved to handle some crazy temperatures, and they've got that super diverse diet, which means they can eat a bunch of different stuff.
Right, we talked about that. It's like
Yeah.
they're not afraid to try anything. But I imagine even with all that toughness, those changes in the environment could still cause some serious problems.
You got it. Climate change isn't just about the planet heating up, it's also messing with rainfall. And droughts are becoming more common, which directly affects the food and water that roadrunners need to survive.
Yeah, so even a creature as adaptable as the Roadrunner, they could still be pushed to their limits with all that going on.
That's exactly what scientists are worried about. And then you've got another problem on top of that, habitat loss. Humans are taking up more and more space, and as we build and develop, well, that squeezes the roadrunners' territory.
Oh, it's like a double whammy.
Hmm.
Climate change is changing the landscape itself, and then human activity is making their homes smaller and smaller. It's kind of a grim picture, isn't it?
It's definitely a challenge, no doubt. But there's some hope, too. Researchers are out there studying roadrunner populations in real time, trying to understand how they're responding to all these changes.
So they're like tracking these birds and gathering all kinds of data. What are they looking for specifically?
They're keeping tabs on everything, from how many roadrunners there are and where they're living, to how successful they are at nesting and raising their young. They're even looking at how their diet is changing. It's all part of conservation efforts. By understanding how roadrunners are adapting or, struggling to adapt, we can make better decisions about how to protect them and their habitat.
That makes sense. You can't really protect something if you don't know how it's being affected in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's not all doom and gloom then.
Not at all. The challenges are there for sure, but there are lots of people working hard to understand and, lessen the impacts of climate change and habitat loss. And roadrunners, well, they're pretty resilient and adaptable, which gives us some hope that they can pull through.
Well, that's good to hear. It's
Mhm.
nice to know that people are working to make sure creatures like the Roadrunner have a future.
Yeah, I think it shows that we're becoming more aware of how connected everything is on Earth, And that actually leads us to another really cool aspect of the Roadrunner, its place in human culture.
Yeah, we touched on that earlier, talking about how important they are in Native American folklore. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. For lots of indigenous cultures in the Southwest, the Roadrunner has a super deep symbolic meaning in their traditions and beliefs. They see them as like these embodiments of speed, agility, cleverness, and of course, survival.
Yeah, it's like they're the spirit of the desert come to life.
Yeah.
So what kind of specific symbolism is attached to them?
Well, they're often associated with good luck, protection, and even healing. Some cultures believe they're like messengers going back and forth between the physical world and the spiritual world. It's kind of a testament to how they can not only survive in the desert, but actually thrive in it.
It's amazing how these cultures have made the Roadrunner such an important part of their way of life.
Yeah, and you can see that reflected in their art, their stories, even their ceremonies. Like the Hopi people have a traditional dance called, get this, the Roadrunner dance. They perform it to bring rain and make sure they have a good harvest.
That's beautiful. It really shows how connected these cultures are to nature and how they see animals as more than just, well, animals. They're like teachers, guides, sources of wisdom.
Exactly. It's a way of looking at things that we could all learn from. It reminds us that there's more to the Roadrunner than just what we see on the surface. Their story is woven into human culture and history, making both even richer.
That's a great point. Speaking of enriching our understanding, I'm really fascinated by how intelligent roadrunners are. We've already talked about their hunting techniques and how they use tools, but are there any other examples of just how clever they are?
Oh, yeah, totally. For instance, they've been seen using rocks to crack open snail shells. I mean, come on, that's some serious problem-solving skills right there. They also stash food away, burying it, and coming back for it later, which shows they can plan for the future. And don't even get me started on their navigation skills. They can travel super long distances and still find their way back to their nests or their hidden food. It's incredible.
Wow, those are all signs of a pretty sharp mind. It makes you wonder how they learn all that stuff. Is it all instinct? Or is there some learning and adapting going on too?
That's the million-dollar question. It's something that keeps researchers up at night trying to figure it out. Some things, like, basic hunting techniques, those are probably instinctual, passed down through their genes. But other things, like using tools and solving complex problems, well, that suggests they can learn and adapt to new situations.
So it's not just one or the other, it's a bit of both. Nature and nurture, working together to shape their behavior.
Bingo!
Hmm.
And that makes their intelligence even more impressive. They're not just reacting to what's happening around them, they're learning from it, changing their strategies to make sure they survive. It's like the ultimate example of adaptability, something we humans could definitely learn a thing or two from, especially with how fast the world is changing these days.
Yeah, that's a good reminder that intelligence comes in lots of different forms and that we can find inspiration in the most unexpected places.
You got it. The Roadrunner, man, their story is full of surprises, from their physical abilities to how much they matter to human cultures, and of course, their crazy intelligence.
And I feel like even after all we've talked about, we've still only scratched the surface. Where do we go from here? We've talked about how they look, how they act, even what they mean to us. But there's one thing we haven't really touched on. Sound. Like, what do roadrunners actually sound like? Have you ever heard one out in the wild?
Oh, their calls are way more varied than people think. They've got this distinct cooing sound that they use to communicate, especially when they're trying to attract a mate. And when they get startled or excited, they make this clucking kind of noise.
So it's not just that beep beep we always hear in the
Yep.
cartoons.
Nope, not quite. Although, I gotta admit, that sound effect, while totally exaggerated, does kind of capture their quick movements and that always on alert vibe they have.
It's funny how those cartoon sounds, even though they're not totally accurate, can really stick with us and like shape how we see real animals. But it's good to remember that there's always more to the story.
More absolutely. Real-life roadrunners are way more complex than any cartoon character. They've got this whole range of sounds and behaviors we haven't even talked about.
Speaking of a bigger story, we've talked about how well-adapted roadrunners are to their environment. But how does their presence actually affect the desert ecosystem as a whole?
No.
I mean, are they just surviving out there, or are they actually playing a part in how things work?
Roadrunners are what we call a keystone species. Basically, that means they're super